Hi, how you doing? Justin here. Welcome to IM-151, in which we're going to be checking out Triad chord grips. Now, Triad's are little three-note chords. The major ones that we're going to start looking at first have the first note, the third note, and the fifth note of a major scale in them. They're kind of easy and they move all around the guitar neck. They work great as a second guitar part, but they also work great as a main guitar part too. Now when I show you this, I'm going to show it to you in three parts, and it's really important that you make sure you master each part before you move on to the next one. So let's get straight in and check out the three triad shapes that you can find on the thinnest three strings. The first chord shape that we're going to check out here is this G major triad, which I'm calling shape 1. Now it's a G major triad because we have the note G here at the third fret of the thinnest string. And if you check out the diagram there, the chord diagram, you'll notice that the root note is on the thinnest string. So playing this little bar here, which covers of course this note here, the note G on the third fret of the thinnest string, this will make this a G major triad. Now to play it, we've got our first finger doing a little mini bar, playing the thinnest two strings, and the second finger reaches over to play one fret higher, which will be of course the fourth fret of the third string. So of course you want to play, strum it, pick one note at a time, and then strum it again to make sure that every note is clear. And as I mentioned earlier, the most important thing here is to remember where the root note is. This is the note G, and this is a G major triad. Really, 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 really important. The root note is G, there, thinner string, there's our G triad. The second shape we're going to check out looks very much like a D chord. Most important thing here is again the root note. Now the root note is played with the third finger. In this case it's on the 8th fret of the second string. The root note for this shape is on the second string. Very important. Now you should be already familiar with playing that shape, and you know that your third finger has to be nice and round, not to mute the thinner string, but play it, strum, pick out, strum as usual. Make sure that the chord sounds good. The third triad shape we're checking out is also a G major triad. This time we have the root note up here at the 12th fret on the third string. That's the really important one. Check the diagram there, the chord diagram. See where the root note is. It's on the third string with the third finger. Little finger goes directly underneath, also on the 12th fret. First finger is going down on the thinnest string at the 10th fret in this case. Making sure that the little finger is nice and round there so you can get that note clear. You're going to strum and pick out and strum. And make sure that you've got that chord really good. The most important thing right now is that you have all three of those triad shapes in your memory, and you're 100% sure you know which note is the root note, what string it's on, and what finger plays it. Until you know that stuff from memory, please don't move on to this next exercise. Part 2 of learning triads is all about moving our triad shapes around up and down the neck. And in order to do this, we need to know our root note and the notes on the fingerboard. Now the first shape we checked out was a G major triad, and that was found at the 3rd fret because the root note, G, was found at the 3rd fret of the thinnest string. So let's get back up our G major triad. Now we're going to use this little chord sequence G, C, G, D, just as an exercise to practice moving our triad shapes around. So the next chord that we're looking for is a C major chord. Now in order to find where C is, we need to of course know where the root note was on our triad shape, which was the thinner string, and therefore we need to find where C is on the thinner string. And hopefully most of you guys will know already that the note C on the thinner string is found at the 8th fret. So if we now move that shape up to the 8th fret, hey, presto, we've got ourselves a C chord. You can kind of check it if you like by playing a regular open C. And then our little C triad shape at the 8th fret. Hey, and it's the same. So we're now moving back to G. which we know is at the 3rd fret because the note G is on the 3rd fret of the thinnest string. And now we want a D chord. So a D note on the thinnest string is going to be found at the 10th fret. So if we move our shape now, so the little bar is up at the 10th fret, we've got ourselves a D chord. So we can play our little sequence now: G at the 3rd fret, C at the 8th fret, G back at the 3rd fret, and now D at the 10th fret. Have a go at playing that little sequence now. I'm just going to strum the chords, and I want you to try and move that shape around. It's still the same shape, you're just moving it from the 3rd fret to the 8th fret, back to the 3rd fret, and then up to the 10th fret. Here we go. 3, 4, G, 2, 3. Now move it up to the 8th fret, C, 2, 3, back to the G, 2, 3, and now all the way up to the 10th fret. 2, 3, 4, and back to G. You can hear that it works really nicely as a kind of a second guitar part, especially if you kind of arpeggiate the notes a bit. But right now we're really concerned with moving the shape around. So that was the first shape. What about the second shape? Now, that one kind of looked like a D chord, didn't it? We found out that the root note for that one was on the 2nd string, was played by the 3rd finger. So the 3rd finger was going to be in the 8th fret of the 2nd string for it to be a G major triad. Now, going back to our little chord progression again, we now want to find ourselves a C chord. So where's the C note now on the 2nd string? Now, most of you are thinking, oh yeah, okay, it's the 1st fret. So we could really use the 1st fret, but then we're not using our other fingers and it kind of defeats the purpose a bit. So the C note is also found at the 13th fret of the 2nd string. So we've got our C chord now, which will be 12, 13, 12. Looks like a D chord, but with our root note, which is played by the 3rd finger in the 13th fret. That's our C. Now we're moving back to our G chord, which had the root note in the 8th fret, played by the 3rd finger. We're still using a little shape that looked like a D chord, of course. And the last chord was D. So we now had a little D chord in the shape that we play a D chord, funnily enough. So with the root note, the 3rd finger in the 3rd fret. That's our D. So if I play the sequence through now, we have G, then we have C, we go back to G, and then down to D. So you can see we've just discovered another way of playing that same sequence. And there's going to be another one. So the last shape that we checked out was this little G chord with the root note on the 3rd string, played by the 3rd finger, and we were putting it on the 12th fret to play our G chord. So quite far up the neck, it went 12, 12, 10, with the 3rd finger, 4th finger, and 1st finger. Now we want to find ourselves a C chord. So now what we're after here is the C note on the 3rd string. Remember where that is? Can you find that one nice and quick? If you can't, you might want to use your octaves. Find the C note there on the 5th fret of the 3rd fret of the 5th string. I'll get it the right way around in a second. And then move it up an octave. And there it is. We got the 5th fret on the 3rd string is the note C, the root note. And then the E and the G played on the 5th fret and the 3rd fret. And we're moving now back to G, which was, of course, having the root note on the 12th fret, and then to a D chord, which is going to have the root note on the 7th fret of the 3rd string. Again, we've got our sequence G, C, G, and D. So there's 3 different ways of playing that same sequence. Now what the ideal thing now to practice would just be to get a little chord progression, record yourself playing G, C, G, D, and then practice using those 3 different ways of playing that chord progression using triads. It's really important that you get this into your memory and you start being able to look for the triad. what you're really looking at each time is where's the root note. You know what string the root note is and what fret the root note is, and you get the right finger to it to form that chord shape. That's the trick really for being able to make these chord changes kind of fast. Of course, it does mean that you need to know the notes on the guitar fingerboard, but you've probably noticed already as part of this foundation series, I have been emphasizing that a little bit, particularly early on in the course. Part 3 of this exercise is learning how to find all 3 of our triads in the same area of the guitar neck. So we're going to be playing the same chord sequence, G, C, G, D, but trying not to move up and down the guitar neck so much, and therefore looking for the notes, the root notes, in roughly the same area of the guitar neck. Let's get to a close-up and see how these triad shapes link together in the same area of the neck. The first chord in the sequence we're looking at is our old friend, the G chord, which you should be very familiar with by now. So we'll start off by playing that one. And now we're looking for a C chord. So the first thing really, we're looking for a C note, somewhere very near one of the notes that we're already playing. Now have a look around, see if you can find it. Hopefully you discovered it was this one here. There's the C on the 3rd string at the 5th fret. Now, what was the triad shape that had the root note on the 3rd string? Which one was it? I know, it was this one. There we go. There's our C chord. So we had G, and then we had C. And now we're going back to G. Now, one of the notes in a G chord is actually a D note already, because the notes in a G chord are G, B, and D. So which one of those is the note D, I wonder? Okay, yep, it's that one. So, what shape was it that had the root note on the 2nd string? Yep, it was the one that looked like a D chord. So there we have our D. So the whole sequence now, we have G, C, G, and D. Okay, let's look at the same chord sequence now, but this time starting off with the 2nd G major grip that we looked at, the one that looked like a D chord. So we've got this one now here, the 3rd finger is in the 8th fret because that's where the G note is, the root note. There's our G chord. Now the next chord we're looking for, of course, is a C. So who can find a C note there? Have a look yourselves. Can you suss it out? Okay, C is there. So which was the shape that had the root note on the thinner string? It was the first shape we looked at. So there's our C chord. Back to G. As I mentioned before, one of those notes is already a D, which is the next chord we're looking for. So have a look which one of the is that, and you're right. It's this note here. This is the note D. So the shape that has the root note on the 3rd string is... That's it, you got it. So now we've got that sequence again. G, C, G, and D. One more. The 3rd triad grip we looked at for the G chord was this one up here with the root note in the 12th fret on the 3rd string. Of course the note G, so that made our little G chord there. And we're looking for a nearby C note. So let's see if we can find our nearby C. Well, there it is. Okay, so what's the shape that we're going to look at for this one? The root note's on the 2nd string. It's the one that looks like a D chord. And then we're going back to our G again. And now we're looking for a D chord. So which one of those notes was the D? Yeah, we got it. And the major triad grip that has the root note on the thinner string is... You got it, it's that one. So our same sequence now is G, C, using different fingers here, it doesn't really matter, you can use those fingers. I sometimes use those fingers. Sometimes I use these fingers for the G, and there's our D chord. So the whole sequence, G, C, G, D. I guess you can see the importance now of knowing the notes all over the fingerboard and why it was so important to know the root notes for each of the triad shapes. What I'd recommend you do now is go through and try a completely different chord progression, maybe something like B, E, F sharp, E. One quick technical thing before we go any further, make sure that you use the palm of your picking hand to rest on the thickest 3 strings to stop those strings from ringing out while you're playing your triad shapes. Okay, it's homework time. So the first thing you're going to do is figure out how to play a minor version of each of those triad shapes. Now we've only got 3 and they were all major triad shapes. Now we looked at them all as a G major triad to start off with, and the G major triad contains the notes G, B and D, which is of course the first note, the third note and the fifth note of the G major scale. Now to change it into a G minor triad, all we need to do is flatten the third by 1 semitone, and the third in this case is the note B. So what I want you to do is to go and take your triad shapes, each one, figure out which the notes are, which one's G, which one's B and which one's D, and then move the note that's B down 1 fret, 1 semitone from B to B flat, and that will give you your 3 minor triad shapes. What I would recommend then is going through and doing exactly the same exercises we've just done for the majors with the minor triads. So taking each shape, moving it up and down the fingerboard for say G minor, C minor, G minor, D minor, and then trying to find them all in the same area of the guitar neck as we did for the kind of the third part of our major triad exercises. Once you know your major and your minor triad shapes, the best thing you can do is to start putting them into a song. So find a song that you really like and see if you can play the whole thing just using these triad shapes. Then see if you can play the same song using triad shapes but in a different part of the guitar neck. It's a really, really good exercise. Probably the best thing you can do is to get your mate to play the song using regular chords while you try and play the same song at the same time using the triad grips. If you haven't got anyone that you can work with like that, you could always record yourself playing the chord sequences and then try using the triads. You really find it loads and loads of fun, and that 2 guitar effect sounds pretty awesome 9 times out of 10. Okay, let's check out homework part 2. Now this one's quite a big task, but I know that you're good for it and you're going to learn a whole lot in the process. In case you hadn't noticed, all of the triads we've looked at so far have been on the thinnest 3 strings, but it's actually possible to play triads on strings 2, 3, 4, 3, 4, 5 or 4, 5 and 6, and in total there's 12 major triad grips that you can play on the guitar. Now what I'd like you to do next is to have a go at looking at the major triad grips on strings 2, 3 and 4. Remember that you've got to find a note G, B and D on each set of strings. It's actually kind of easy. If you write out a picture of the guitar neck and write all of the notes on it and just look for the G, B and D notes, you'll find that they kind of form into very nice triad shapes that are pretty easy on the fingers. I'm going to show you this set of major triads now, but have a go at working it out first if you want to get the most benefit. Triad grip 4 looks like this. I'm playing you a G major triad. We have the root note here on the note G, which is the 5th fret of the 4th string. Then we've got the 4th fret of the 3rd string, 3rd fret of the 2nd string. Pretty easy one to play this. You probably recognize it as the middle of this G bar chord shape. Funnily enough, look at that. That looks like the top part of that. Look. Ah, that's strange, isn't it? The next chord grip we're looking at on strings 2, 3 and 4 looks like this. Our root note G is here at the 8th fret of the 2nd string, played with the 2nd finger. We've got our 1st finger on the 7th fret of the 3rd string, and 3rd finger reaching over for the 9th fret of the 4th string. And the last triad grip we're looking at on strings 2, 3 and 4 looks like this. It's a straight bar. There's our root note in the middle on the 3rd string, 12th fret. Got 1 note either side. You could play it kind of like that, I guess, with all 3 different fingers in the same fret, but it's a bit difficult, so you could use a bar. Doesn't matter what finger, as long as you're just playing 4th string, 3rd string, 2nd string. If you use your 3rd finger like I'm doing there now, look, oh, there's your root note. That kind of looks familiar, doesn't it? So there's quite a few little tricks like that to remember where your chord shapes are. So that's the 3rd triad shape that you want on strings 2, 3 and 4. For those of you that are up for it, I've got one more bit of homework for you. Now we've just checked out the major triad grips using strings 2, 3 and 4. What I think is really important is that you now find the minor grips on strings 2, 3 and 4. You shouldn't find it that difficult. Use the same rules as before. Look for the B note and flatten it by 1 semitone. There are triad shapes to be found on strings 3, 4, 5 and 4, 5 and 6. But because the strings are thicker and the notes are lower, they tend to sound a little bit muddier. They're not quite as useful. So I would highly recommend practicing the 12 triad shapes, that's the 6 major and the 6 minor that we've covered in this, and learn how to use them before you even think about learning those other shapes. Hope you had a lot of fun with that. Haven't hurt your head too much, and I'll see you for another lesson sometime very soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.